It's the March 2026 edition of the IoT Security Foundation webinar today, and this is the 35th installment of this series. If you'd like to watch shortened versions of all previous 34 recordings, go to our YouTube channel and they're all there in one convenient playlist. Coming up a bit later on, we'll have Murat Çakmak of Microservice Store presenting autonomous compliance, operationalizing EU CRA and UK PSTI via embedded microservices. But first up today, joining us from Bristol, it's Jonny Tyers of Threatplane. He's presenting Standards versus Security, a proactive compliance framework. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you're watching live on Zoom, please put any questions, comments, or observations in Zoom chat and we'll talk them over a bit later. But enough from me. Jonny, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you very much, Chris. And good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. It's great to see you all. So I'm founder and MD of a company called Threatplane. We're based in Bristol in the UK, and we are a threat modeling company. My background is in the other side of the fence. I have a hacking background, and many years ago got caught, had to choose between staying on my sort of low path or joining the high path, joining the defending team. Took the right decision, as you can see, because I'm here today, and had a career in software development and infrastructure, all in kind of secure environments spanning government, telecoms, and other sectors, and then started Threatplane nearly 10 years ago. And we are a threat modeling company, and we focus on doing two things: bespoke technology, i.e. not your sort of IT stack, not your sort of COTS offerings, but things which are built from the ground up for some bespoke purpose, like a product, for example, whether it's digital, whether it involves embedded elements, etc. And then all about business outcomes. And although I'm talking about Threatplane, what I'm going to be talking about today is threat modeling, as you'll see, is all about achieving these things. And so you can take these away. This is a practical session where you'll be able to see how we do it. This should arm you with some of the basics for going away and doing it yourself. That's my goal for this session. So if you work in security, this sort of feeling will not be unfamiliar to you, that there's just so much to do. There is lots of paperwork, there's lots of things to respond to in terms of incidents, there's lots of questions being asked of you. Some of you on this, watching this may well be not in security formally, but you may be in engineering and product, and you may have a different job title, but that security is part of your role, whether it's official or unofficial. And if that's the case, as is increasingly so for many of us, then you will also feel like this, is that there's kind of an overwhelming sense. And one of the reasons that we sort of feel that this sense of overwhelm is there is that things are siloed. There's compliance in one area, there's sort of incident management and response in another area, there's proactive design and architecture in another, and so on. And staying abreast of all of these different areas, aspects of security, is hard. And the other thing is that security is just more important than ever. At the risk of asking you to suck eggs, we know that the security risks are bigger than ever before. And you know, this is not a threat intelligence session where I'm going through updates on what's happening in the threat world, but you know, we know, we can see that attacks are getting more sophisticated, attackers are getting more sophisticated, AI is leveling them up in terms of tools and in terms of process and in terms of speed of execution. And we focus on business outcomes, as I said before, and we tend to measure them along 5 categories: revenue, reputation, operations, compliance, and then the 5th one is safety, which is not here, but is a recent addition to our ROCs framework, just because we find that these are the topics which your superiors are interested in. It's either about getting products to market, or it's about protecting your customers from data breaches, or it's about running efficient operations for things like customer support, for maintenance of fleets, etc., or compliance, which we're going to talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, or safety, for some of you who may be operating in safety critical environments or with safety critical hardware. But there's also things that are a bit closer to home for those of us who work in the context of engineering and product development. So security also has a direct impact on your, well, indirect impact on your product roadmap. Getting security wrong will make it unpredictable, will make it, will introduce unplanned work later on. Getting it right allows it to speed on as planned. It affects your time to market. Security, you can skip security altogether. That's one way of affecting your time to market, but that will come to bite you later on. So planning it pragmatically but correctly early on is a good way of making efficient that security element and getting time to market right. And then, of course, resilience of the technology once it's deployed, which is an important consideration. And in view of the way that compliance frameworks are going, that's something that we're being forced to think about. And some organizations didn't pay as much attention to it before as they are having to now because of the new rules that are coming around devices that are in the field. So we focus on three key use cases when we think about threat modeling in this context. The first thing is about confidence, and this may seem like a soft thing to start with, but to start with, it's actually about internal confidence about the things that we're shipping. Are we sure that what we're designing now is going to sort of stay as it is from a security perspective, a sort of threat profile and attack surface perspective through the rest of the design cycle? And are we confident in the code that we're shipping? Obviously, as we've just touched on, protecting the businesses that we work for and our customers against threats is a key part of security. But also, and this may seem a little bit backwards, but actually giving speed, flexibility, and alignment to engineering and development is really important from our perspective as well. Is that for all of you who are working on products and on software stacks, etc., that contribute to products, speed, the ability to develop features quickly in order to understand the requirements quickly, all of that product and software development lifecycle stuff is really important. And we want to give you, and this is through threat modeling, what we give you is a process that aligns to that. It doesn't get in the way, doesn't sit there and say no at the worst possible moment, but actually aligns to it really well, so that you can run your process with security dovetailed into it and get the results that you want to see. Picking up security along the way, as it were. So let's get into what threat modeling actually entails. We take threat modeling one level up, and we call it risk-based threat modeling because we build in business risk. And when you do your threat modeling, you don't have to do this, but we find it's incredibly helpful because it helps with prioritization later on. So thinking about business risk, we take the 5 elements. There are 4 here: revenue, reputation, operations, compliance, and the 5th one is safety, which will be here once I update the slide deck. And you start with risk first, so that you're clear on what data we're handling, the services we're offering as part of this device that we're putting out, or the software developing, or the application we're developing, and you're clear about the business risks to you as a business. And you'll notice that none of these are technical concepts, and that's deliberate. They are all things that you can use to build like a business case, for example, and to speak in language that those around you who are not technical understand. And that's entirely the point of the risk end, is that you're able to produce non-technical outputs. Second is we think about the things that we're actually looking to secure, which we call assets, or in threat modeling parlance, we call them DFDs, data flow diagrams, because they are often in diagrammatic form. And although usually we're thinking about technical concepts, systems, components, data flows, it can also capture things which are not technical. So it might be users, customers, it might be business processes that are partly automated and driven by systems and partly not. It might be third-party elements, which may be third-party devices, it may be third-party APIs, third-party things like hosting environments, but it could also be third-party teams, perhaps, that are managing infrastructure on your behalf in a support capacity, or it could be a third-party manufacturer who's providing input into a process, physical inputs, digital inputs, etc. So it can be quite versatile. And then finally, after the threat assessment, the key output, which everyone is interested in, what do we do about it? What are the controls that we need to implement? What's the remediation we need to take? And we usually just summarize this as controls. And I like the moniker of primed, prevention, responsive, mitigating and detective as a way of capturing the different ways that controls can be used to mitigate different threats and the impact of different threats. It goes almost without saying that compliance has a strong part to play in this controls piece as well. Although all of the compliance frameworks that a lot of you are probably thinking about, whether it's CRA, whether it's RED, whether it's things like DORA and NIS2, NIST, et cetera, whatever those frameworks are, many of them focus on controls. Maybe it's as specific as thou shalt have MFA, or you need to encrypt communications between devices. But sometimes it's more high level than that. It's about risk management processes, about vetting third parties, etc. So in terms of actually building a threat model, this is the process that we go through, and we find this works really well. Threat modeling at its core is collaborative, and although that may feel boring or disruptive in the sense that it takes time, we find that collaboration really pays off. There are platforms and companies and stuff out there that will advocate automated threat modeling. Every practitioner who has practical experience doing threat modeling in the context of an engineering team or a tech company will tell you that generally that approach doesn't work, because although it produces the model quickly, you've skipped over really important nuances in the detail that you've captured, and you're liable to be creating really verbose threat models that are actually quite disconnected from the reality of your business, and disconnected, for example, from the language of how you describe controls and stuff like that. So it's important to automate where we can, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but at the same time retain the human element. That's certainly our philosophy. And the way that comes about is first through a risk workshop, which is looking at those business risks that I talked about earlier. The second is looking at a technology workshop and looking at the assets that you have. These two are, don't have to be long. Particularly the risk workshop it can be, an hour. It can be all that's required to sort of get down on paper the risks that often people have in their minds already. The technology workshops can take a little bit longer, but not too much longer. And then we move to actually assessing the threats, understanding where the attack vectors are, where the vulnerabilities are, and then on to thinking about controls and remediation. I'm just going to step through a worked example because of the time. I can't delve into each of these in detail, but feel free to ask questions after at the end of the session to sort of get me to elaborate on these if you're interested. So say you have a set of risks, and I've grossly simplified this. Say we have a service where there's a full outage, there's a sort of partial outage, a risk around audit being incomplete, and around another service called metrics, which is compromised by a hacker. And say we've got an architecture here. In this case, it's a cloud architecture. Doesn't have to be a cloud architecture when you're threat modeling, but in this case it is. And we're going to use Stride to do the threat modeling for this. Stride is a standard framework used to help drive threat models. And say we've used Stride to come up with these different threats. This is the threat assessment part of the exercise. Stride is a really helpful way of getting to these. I'm not going to delve into detail about how we came up with these now, but this is kind of the beginning part. The key thing is that risk assessing these is just a really important step to understand the priority of these. However, as we said before, we're going to have controls that mitigate each of these threats. So here we have a particular component called getUser, which in this case is a lambda function. And we have a threat that someone could edit the role. They could be in the cloud environment, edit an execution role in order to elevate privileges, in order to, in this case, to cause an outage. And there are other threats here around editing configuration or exploitation of vulnerabilities. And against those threats, we're going to have different controls, some of which might be around code review, some of which might be around minimum privileges, RBAC and the like, IAM policies in this case. Some of them might be around things like data retention and logging and so on. So you can see here a bit of a mix of technical and non-technical controls. And at the beginning, we had a set of risks that we assigned to each threat. But once we've taken into consideration these controls, you'll notice that some of these are ticked, as in they are complete, they are in place. Some of them are not ticked, they have crosses against them, which means they're not complete. And so you can see from the colors here, there's one risk clearly outstanding. Now, this is a really simple example, I'll grant you, but The point is that this is really effective for drawing out where actually the gaps are in a bigger architecture. If you have a monster architecture like this is a sort of an east-west networking diagram for a customer that we threat modeled some time ago now, with on-prem elements, et cetera, et cetera. Finding the gaps in this is actually quite important and much harder than might meet the eye. So that's kind of where threat modeling really helps. Threat modeling also serves to document all of this, bring all of the security kind of variables into one place around threats, controls, risk, and that crucial attack surface. So you've got a single point of documentation. Because it's a single point of documentation, and I should mention that once it's produced, it's very quick to iterate on, which is nice and compatible with the software development process. Of course, as we've said, you'll have your list of controls, your remediation plan, but there are numerous other assets as well. It can drive instant playbooks. It can drive how you define detections. It can drive all sorts of other outputs which other people need to see in the business around reporting or around governance and compliance, which I'm going to come on to. So it's quite a useful documentation tool and communications tool, as well as just security. And as I mentioned a minute ago, doing this in the context of a development process tends to start with a heavy threat modeling session first, followed by lighter threat modeling sessions after. Once you've got a model down, iterating on it as you iterate a piece of software, or iterate on designs for a product, etc., become much easier because the base of the model is there. Actually, to review that, it's very easy to work with. It's very easy for a team to do that as part of their design process or as part of story planning, whatever your process is. And as we've already said, it drives these external outputs to these external teams, whether it's aiding with pen testing, DPO related, or GRC and IT. On the compliance piece, I just quickly touched on this before I close. What we tend to find is that threat models are great. They're not primarily compliance tools, but they are a really useful way of feeding into a compliance process, which you may already have. And in the organizations where we've done this before, typically they do have an existing governance process, which is driven by spreadsheets or is driven by a platform. We will, in those scenarios, typically take a threat model in some kind of digital form. We generate YAML as part of our threat models, for example. It doesn't have to be YAML, but that's a good example. And then you can feed it into a compliance tool. We're talking to people about doing this with agentic tools at the moment, where actually having an MCP server in the middle, for example, is a possibility. And here's an example from a customer not too long ago, where they're using basic spreadsheets. So this is just literally a screenshot out of Google Sheets. But even from this simple example, you can start to see. So there are threat model controls on the right, which have been recommended by the threat model, and you can see they start to include things like detective controls. And you can start to map them back to different frameworks. In this case, this is MITRE embed. This is actually the same threat model, but mapped against CCM, the Cloud Controls Matrix. And you can see here different areas of the CCM matrix with different control stories, different themes, whether it's whether it's access control, whether it's business continuity, et cetera, and different controls being mapped there. And obviously this can be filtered on the controls you do have in place, the controls you don't yet have in place, et cetera, et cetera. And you could overlay this also with the risk assessment that we've already talked about in this threat model. So that was all I was going to talk about today. Thank you for listening, and I hope that's just been helpful as a useful primer. I'd encourage everyone to give it a go. This is something which everyone can join in on. If you are interested to get started, I'd recommend you look up Stride as a great starter for 10 on how to get started. I'd also recommend Adam Shostak. Sadly, in this office, I don't have his book here, but often I'd be waving his book around. Adam Shostak did a great book which is just called Threat Modeling, and is a great primer and introduction to the subject if you want to get into it yourself. Threatplane and what we do threat modeling as a service and training for engineering teams, and we have our own threat modeling platform in case you're interested. But yep, that's all from me. Thank you very much, folks.
Threatplane.com if you would like to get in touch with Jonny and learn more. Thank you very much for that indeed. Jonny Tyers in Bristol. Any questions for Jonny? The more awkward the better. Roll some grenades if you fancy shaking things up today. Put them in Zoom chat and we'll put those questions to Jonny towards the end of today's broadcast. Next month's IoTSF webinar will be a CRA special with Mustanir Ali of Element and David Pashley of Direct Insights. We'll be covering, amongst other aspects, CRA reporting obligations. That's on Thursday, 23rd of April, and the link to register is in Zoom chat right now. If you're watching live, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'll put the link in the description. Onwards now with our next guest presenter. He joins us from the 2026 Cherry Blossoms Conference in Cambridge today. He is Murat Çakmak of Zaya, and he's going to be talking about one of his products today, Microservice Store. And today he's talking more specifically autonomous compliance, operationalizing EU CRA and UK PSTI via embedded microservices. If you're watching live, please put any questions for Murat in Zoom chat, and we'll put those to him soon. Murat, the floor is yours, my friend.